Well, I thought we'd try something. I don't know if you guys, how many of you know this song? Yeah, just as I thought. So there I was at Jesus 73. There was about, I would say, 80,000 Christians out on a farm in Pennsylvania. And they take it over for a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Now, back in those days, I was the leader of the famous charismatic Fats and the Jesus Brats. We had been traveling and had made a recording in the studio where you go in and at about 2 hours you in tracks, one shot. And there at Jesus 73 was my hero, Andre. Well, all I can say is this man is anointed, not only in his songs, like "To God Be the Glory," so many songs. Through it all, bless the Lord, oh my soul. What is it? There you go. So, so I went up to the stage after he and his group performed, and he was so nice to me. I said, would you listen to my tape? I got to understand. I was, well, how old was I? Well, I was 29. And he said yes. And the next day he saw me and he told me he liked 3 of the cuts on it. And he thought, I should keep on going and whatever. In his group was a singer there, also played piano like Andre did when he got up to sing, that she played. This girl, Danny Bell Hall. And she went on her own eventually, and she was fantastic. She died early, as many of them do. She was a little overweight, gospel singer, traveling around, heart problems, this and that. She didn't last too long, but she was a wonderful, and she wrote this song. It's about the boy who gave the fish and the bread to Jesus. So it goes like this. I'll try to do it. I just found it on the web today, so I'm trying to make a version. And I need Christine. So you can see when I get to the end of the line there that we're going to have to go to the next thing. Okay. Just ordinary people. God uses ordinary people. He chooses people just like me and you, who are willing to do as he commands. God uses people who will give him all. No matter how small or all may seem to you, because little becomes much when you place it in the master's hand. Just like a little lad who gave Jesus all he had, how the multitudes were fed with fish and a loaf of bread. What you have may not be much, but when you yield it to the touch of the master's hand, then you'll understand how your life will never be the same. Ordinary people, God uses ordinary people. He chooses people just like me and you, who are willing to give as he commands. God chooses people that will give him all, no matter how small your all may seem to you, because little becomes much when you give it in the master's hand. That's it. as little becomes much when you give it in the master's hand. That's a beautiful song, isn't it? Ordinary people, that's who God wants to use, that's who we are. But this story that we have to tell about Jesus in the Gospel of Luke, would you turn that thing off where it crackles again? Thank you. It's a story about ordinary people. And that's what Luke is trying to get across. We are looking at Luke chapter 9 tonight, so let's open up there. We're going to read half of it.
Whoever's complaining about the sound quality.
Okay. Okay, Luke chapter 9. We're going to read verses 1 through 36 tonight, okay? 1 through 36. Let's all take a couple of verses. Isabel, we'll start with you going across and this back and forth and back and forth. Take 2 or 3 verses each, and let's get through it.
And he called the 12 together in authority over all the demons and to heal diseases. And he sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to perform healing. And he said to them, take nothing for your journey, neither a staff, nor a bag, nor bread, nor money, and do not even have 2 tunics each.
Whatever house you enter, stay there until you leave the area. Wherever they do not receive you, as you leave that town, shake the dust off. Your feet is testimony against them. They departed and went through the villages, proclaiming news and healing people everywhere.
Now Herod the Tetrarch heard about all that was happening. He was perplexed. It was said by John Baptist death. By some that Elijah had appeared, and by others that one of the prophets of old risen. Herod said, John I beheaded, but who is this about whom I hear such things? And he sought to see him.
Verse 10, and the apostles, when they had returned, told him what they had done. Then he took them and went aside privately to a place belonging to the city called Bethsaida. But when multitudes knew it, they followed him, and he received them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God, and healed those who had need of healing.
Late in the afternoon, the 12 came to him and said, send the crowd away to the surrounding villages and countryside and find food and lodging, because we are in a remote place here. He replied, you give something to eat. They answered, 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, unless we go and buy food for a crowd. About 5,000 men were there.
And he said to the have them sit down so they eat in groups of about 50 each. They did so and had them all sit down. They took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed them and broke them, and kept giving them to the disciples to set before them.
So they all ate and were filled, and 12 baskets of the leftover fragments were taken up by them. It happened, he was alone, and his disciples joined him and asked them, saying, who do the crowd say that I am?
They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others that one of the prophets of long ago has come back to life. But what about you, he asked, who do you say that I am? Peter answered, the Christ of God. Jesus strictly warned them, not this man,
saying, the Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected by the elders and scribes, and be killed, and be raised on the 3rd day. As he was saying to them all, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me.
For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake, he is the one who will save it. For what is a man profited if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself?
For whoever is ashamed of me and my words, of him the Son of Man will be ashamed when he comes in his own glory and his Father's and of the holy angels. But I tell you truly, there are some standing here who shall not taste death till they see the kingdom of God.
About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up onto the mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as the flash of lightning. And behold, two men came to him, and they were Moses and Elijah, who appearing in glory were speaking of him, of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions had been overcome with sleep. And when they were fully awake, they saw his glory and the two men standing with him.
Hey, Jen, verse 33.
And as the men departed from him, Peter said to Jesus, Master, it is good here. Let us make three tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, not knowing what he said. As he was saying these things, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. And the voice came out of the cloud, This is my son, my chosen one, listen to him.
When the first time Jesus was found with them, but they kept quiet and told no one in those days any of the things they had seen. Now it happened.
Okay, that's it. We're just going to go that far. So basically, you've always have a three situations that are near each other. One is Jesus, the other is the disciples, and the third are the people of Galilee. This is how Luke is setting up these early chapters in the Gospel of Luke. Once Jesus is presented, he comes into Galilee, and actually a couple of chapters, the focus, might say, upon the people there. Those who are lepers, and those who are broken, and those who are paralyzed, and those who have issues of blood. And you see the condition of that Jesus comes and gives them a jubilee. The focus is on what's happening in Galilee among people. Of course, Jesus is there, the disciples are there, but the focus is on the people. And then we come to chapter 7 and 8 that we have looked at before. And in chapter 7 and 8, the focus shifts. And now from looking at the people, we're looking at Jesus as the great sower of the seed, of going out in the kingdom and sharing the gospel with tremendous effect. And we end about this sowing and all these kinds of things. And he's making a community up, a family up, out of those who received the sown word of God. So now the focus is on Jesus, and especially at the end of chapter 8, where we notice these tremendous miracles that Jesus did. He stilled the tempest when he healed the army of demons, when he healed the woman who was hemorrhaging and raised Jairus' daughter. Now the focus is clearly on Jesus, and the question being asked by all is, who is this Son of Man? Which now brings us to chapter 9. And in chapter 9, the focus is now going to be upon the disciples. Now it's time for the disciples to come to the foreground to learn their lessons. And the lesson that we're going to learn tonight in the first half of this chapter is a very simple one. It's this. If you're a disciple walking and serving Jesus, he fills you with provision and grace to do that which you are called to do. So we're going to see the gracious side of Jesus' supply for those who would serve. If you're going to serve, you never have to worry again about money, about anybody not taking care of you. It just won't happen. Then the second half of chapter 9 is a further education for the disciples, where they are slowly but surely undone. Their self-life is brought to the fore. They're challenged. You know, they want to throw fire down on a Samaritan town and all such things. They're so full of themselves that then Jesus is now having to reduce them and cause them to decrease, which is the other aspect of the cross in the disciples' education. So he speaks this time about the cross for the first time to the disciples in the Gospel of Luke. And the next time we are together, the second half of chapter 9, you look and you'll see the cross being applied to the disciples as they are undone, as they are whittled down, as they are humbled, as they are reproved, as they are taught lessons that a disciple needs to learn. But first, before Jesus ever does that, what does he do? He gives you grace and more grace and more grace. And so here are the stories that we'll be looking at, if you want to say. The Lord, when he sends you out, gives you delegated authority and power to be able to fulfill the ministry that he calls you to do. It's wonderful. And he also gives you all the provisions necessary so you don't have to worry about bringing an extra coat, etc. Right? He is gracious. If you serve, he supplies. Number 2, verses 7 through 9, there's a little footnote there. In the aftermath of John's martyrdom and the ministry of Jesus and the disciples is bothering Herod greatly. And then in verses 10 through 17, we come back to the story of the disciples as they learn heaven's unlimited supply in the feeding of the 5,000. And then we come to the next story where the disciple given a mountaintop vision, a revelation of the Messiah, and that changes their whole life. And then in verses 23 through 27, they are told for the first time that his cross is coming. No. And the cross is like his. So the identity of the cross, the grace of God shares these things before they happen. And then finally, the disciples are greatly overwhelmed by their first view of Jesus in his glory and standing. So it's a wonderful chapter because, listen, as a disciple, you should be, this is your right, your heritage. By the grace of God, your experience should be ever ascending up the mountain. So this starts down here and it starts going up the mountain, as our lives should by the grace of God. All right? So are you ready to follow? Are you a disciple? Under discipline. And so he says, okay, now my yoke is on you. Now I'm going to show you how light it is. Now look at this. I provide everything for you. And so on and so forth. That's what discipline's like. And you have to learn how to travel light and shake up kingdoms and do all kinds of things. All right, here we go. Before we get into those stories, there is always my blue zone. My blue zone always means we have to address context a little bit, because in order we can understand it. All of us have seen these stories because most of them are in all 3 of the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. One is in all 4. Do you know which one that is? The feeding of the 5,000 is in all 4 Gospels. It means it's a very, very important story, right? But 2 contextual matters, let's look at this for a second. The so-called crisis is in the back of chapter 9. It's going on during the whole. And secondly, the great synoptic transition, the great transition, as shown in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, is found here in Luke chapter 9. So these are 2 very important things that are background. And Luke doesn't really bring them out that much because he's not trying to bring out kingdom aspects. He's not trying to bring out Jewish problems. He's just trying to prove to the Greeks that Jesus is the Son of God and the Son of Man. So being his target being the Gentiles, he leaves a lot of things aside that Matthew and Mark would take up. All right, let's look. All right. Now, in Luke 9, you have the sending out of the 12, and this actually opened up a period of almost 6 months to a year where they ministered in the villages. So now this was not just 2 weeks, a little trial run. This was 6 months to a year. When you fill in with Matthew and Mark, you realize that this was a long period of time that they went on this 3rd section of the Galilean campaign. First section, Jesus went and proclaimed Jubilee. Second section, Jesus started collecting disciples, and they walked along with him and watched as Jesus did everything. Third section, now they're going to participate. That's what's going on right here. And it lasts 6 months to a year. So he sends them out for this period of 6 months to a year. And at this time, their phase was ended with the death of John the Baptist. Now, as you know, he was in prison for a long time up in this castle over on the other side of the lake. Herod had kept him there. But when actually John the Baptist was martyred, it stopped this whole ministry. And in Luke chapter 9, verse 10, it just mentions that Jesus and his disciples withdrew out to Bethsaida. But when you see all of the Gospels together, you realize this was a very traumatic experience. You have to realize that perhaps, it's not really quite clear, but perhaps some of Jesus' own disciples went and got the body of John the Baptist because they used to be John's disciples. And they came after they buried John the Baptist's body, they came and reported it to Jesus. And Jesus said, let's go aside for a while. So there was that's the crisis, you see. The feeding of the 5,000, well, we think it's a wonderful story, of course. And it ends with Jesus walking on the water, which Luke doesn't even mention, because John tells us that the facts of the matter is, after feeding the 5,000, many of the multitude decided to stop following him. It was the end of his Galilean campaign. They became upset about Jesus saying, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, and they would not travel with him anymore. You remember that. That's a real turning point. And it happened during that time, right after the 5,000. See, now Luke doesn't go into this at all, but this is background. It's good to know. And then Jesus, from this point on for his ministry, bypassed Herod's Galilee, Herod, the king of Galilee. And he bypassed Herod's Galilee and brought his disciples into heavenly things up in the mountains of Mount Hermon, up in the foothills there, Caesarea Philippi, etc. Anybody know whose kingdom that was up there? Give you a hint. Caesarea Philippi. Yeah, it's Philip's kingdom. It's the tetrarchy. The kingdom was divided into four, and Philip's piece was up there. And so they went up to Philip's area, out of the realm of actually Herod and Philip had a fight that the Romans had to come in and stop. And that's how Herod was deposed as a total reprobate and died about 10 years after Jesus' death. But that's a whole nother story. So you see, all of that is background. You're missing the story of Jesus walking on the water, the Syrophoenician woman, the 4,000 being fed. All these things took time. But Luke is wanting you to see how Jesus is now training the disciples by the grace of God. Okay? The second matter that is not really brought out by Luke, but is very much a thing, is the great transition that took place in Jesus' ministry. This was the moment of transition, which meant there were certain things that had to happen before Jesus could go to Calvary. And so that's why at the end of chapter 9, we have this famous and very important verse. And Jesus set his face to go to Jerusalem. Because now these things had transpired. These transitional things had transpired. And now the green light and the last 6 months of Jesus' ministry begins. Chapter 9, verse 53, and then moving right into chapter 10, we are now in the last 6 months of Jesus' ministry. So you see, Luke skips over a lot of stuff. But now chapter 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, most of that's original stuff only with Luke. So now we're getting into the zone where there are some stories that are in the other Gospels, but most of it, prodigal son, all these things are all Luke, all from sources that Luke picked up, okay? Now what was the great transition that had to happen? One, they had to understand the messianic secret. Mark emphasizes that part of the transition. In Mark, it never says Jesus is the Messiah, except at verse 1 of Mark. And it says they never understood it until Mark chapter 8, where suddenly messianic secret was out. Jesus is the Messiah. The second part of the transition was that Jesus said, okay, I'm going to build the church. And I give you the keys to the kingdom. All of that, a very important part of the transition. Now that the Messiah is revealed, now the church is revealed. Wonderful. Very important transition. The disciples had to learn these things later on. They would build the church upon these things. The third thing, Luke emphasized the way of the cross. It's in Matthew and Mark as well. They all saw that the way of the cross, in Mark especially, here in Luke as well, this is the first time it mentions the cross. And it's an absolute surprise that blows away the disciples. They have no idea what he's talking about, the cross. What cross? Where do you go? Why go to Jerusalem? Peter says, no, don't go. I mean, it just catches them totally by surprise. But this had to get out before Jesus could go to Jerusalem. And as you'll see, he shares it with his disciples. And then Luke especially emphasizes this trip up the Mount of Transfiguration and the glory of Jesus shining all about them. And all of these things are part of a transition. So here they go up on the mountain, as it were. They see that Jesus is the Messiah. They see that Jesus is building the church. They see that the way of Jesus' victory is through the cross in Jerusalem. And they see 8 days later, higher up on that mountain, Jesus transfigured in glory. Or as Peter calls it, what does Peter call it in 2 Peter chapter 1? He recalls this incident with him all of his life. This was something burned into his heart. What is it? Yeah, well, the majestic glory. It says the majestic glory. That's what Peter remembers this moment as being. This was the moment of clarity. When I saw not only who Jesus was, but this is the first time I heard God speak from heaven and say, "This is my son. Listen to him." And Elijah and Moses disappeared. Now that's a moment that'll change your life. So here we are looking at this transitional moment that we find. All right, now we can get to our story. The first one is verses 1 through 6 that we already read, where Jesus gives them that commission. He gathered them together, and it says he gave them authority and power to heal and to deliver. Matthew 10 spends a whole chapter on this section, which Luke only gives really 5 verses to. So, see, Luke's not interested in all, because Matthew chapter 10 is the whole chapter where Jesus gives them instructions on being a disciple. Luke bypasses that and says, okay, here's the deal. The first thing you got to understand is, of course, when you look at verses 1 through 6, when you take a look at it, what is the main thing that impresses you? So have a look. Well, the main thing that would that you would see if you were seeing this for the first time, now you got to slip into the disciples' shoes. Who's wearing Peter's sandals tonight? Caleb, you got them on? Now listen, when this happens for the first time, what's the thing that really impresses you? If I had some guy, let's say Abe came up to me and said, "Dana, I'm sending you out throughout New York, and I'm giving you the power and authority to heal, to deliver, and to preach the gospel." My first question would be, on what basis is Abe going to give this to me? So the first thing you should really notice is, who has the authority and the power to delegate? I mean, now the disciples were getting sent out. Now you understand, if you're a disciple, there's nothing better you like to do than to go around with Caleb and see him do the miracles. Now that's fun. And even, you could say, hey, I had something to do with that. I fixed Jesus' breakfast. All right, so you're watching Caleb and everything. And now Caleb says, okay, now I'm sending you out. Now suddenly, the armpits are sweaty. Wait, I got to go with my brother? Peter and Andrew? Giovanni and Leandra? Hey, aren't you going to make a better matchup than that for ministry? God, what are you doing? But he says, but I have given you the authority. That means I'm giving you the right to preach and herald that gospel. And I'm giving you the dunamis, the dynamite to do it. Now, 2 very simple things, but here's our question. Has the Lord sent us out? Do we have his authority and his power? What did it say in the book of Acts that disciples were given? It's just changed a little bit from the Gospels. What does it say in Acts that they were given and they went about doing these things? They were given his name. That's the right. And what right is that? Jesus' name. In Jesus' name, rise up. Now, you see, actually, we've been given that power and authority. Or have we? Maybe you think we haven't. Now, our disciples are not. See, if we are disciples by the grace of God, we should expect that this should be our reality too. Or, yeah, Jeff.
I just have a question about that. Because the Holy Spirit is given the power was then so that accomplished through prayer, so that we have our faith. We saw this, that's why I'm wondering.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, you have to give the disciples credit. You know, when Jesus was there, after seeing all he could do, it lent some credence to when he said, I'm giving you now the power and authority to do these things. I mean, they'd seen he could do it. Now, we haven't seen Jesus do that much around. We've just read. But now, do we believe? Have we been clothed with power from on high? I mean, you know. But this is very important. I mean, so, okay, so if we're disciples. Is he sending us out to go out in New York? But I'm giving you no equipment. I'm not even giving you the right to go out. And you certainly don't have any power to go out, except the gospel, the gab, the gift of gab. You know, Sammy's got the gift of gab. So he can talk to a turtle on the street and it'll talk back, you know. But we need, right? Do we need this? Oh, well, sure. Maybe we should claim it before we go out then anyway. And these are realities, see? Okay. So you're given three things, actually: the power, the authority, and the grace to herald this kingdom gospel that you've heard me preaching all this time. Jesus says it's your turn. Now, they'd heard him preach the kingdom gospel many times, and they went out. And boy, I mean, can you imagine? I mean, just picture Caleb and Jeff. They go out to a village here, let's say Magdala, there in Galilee. And they go, two of them, and they start preaching the gospel, and there's somebody and Jeff reaches over and lays his hands on this guy, and this guy's healed. Now, you know, Jeff, now he's already 6'9", and his hair stands up another foot. And Caleb has just become 6'2". And you can you imagine how exciting it must have been for them to do these things? I mean, think about it. I don't know what you think, but I bet you the first time they saw that lame guy sitting out on the road, Caleb said, you do it. Jeff says, no, you do it. No, Jeff says, yeah, I'm too tall. I can't bend over my back. Caleb says, all right, well, then let me get out my screwdriver and see if I can fix it. But what happened? So Caleb bends over, touches the guy, gets healed. Now, Caleb and Jeff are going to bet that for the rest of the day. Plus, when they get to the next town, now there's like 150 people ready to listen to them. There's only 25 in the first village, but the news is catching on. I mean, imagine the thrill of going around for 6 months like that. It must have just turned their lives upside down. It was unbelievable. All right, well, there we go. Now, the second part of the story was he made these statements, right? What did he say? Don't take with you? What is it? What specifically, what does he say? Don't take clothes, don't take staff, don't take money, don't take extra food, don't take any Chinese buns. Listen, listen. Okay, now, okay, you say, oh, yeah, well, you know, so, okay, let's clarify a few things. Now, first of all, Jesus isn't saying you can't have a car back in your garage in Capernaum. Peter's got a family, and hopefully Peter's got a bank account to take care of his family. And Jesus didn't say, wipe out your bank account now, you're serving me. But he said, when you're serving me, I am your debtor. I will take care of you. And I want you to have that kind of faith so you're not carrying extra stuff just in case Jesus doesn't show up. When you read Christian biographies, aren't you amazed at those ones where the guy only has $3 left? So he takes the train ride halfway into Scotland, and then he gets off the train and says, okay, I got no more money, and I'm supposed to get up to, you know, wherever, St. Andrews to play golf. And he's standing again in the station. Here comes a golfer over there, gives him a quid, and he gets back on the train. He makes it. I mean, there's so many stories like that where God provides. Now, Jesus is convinced that if you're a disciple, you're going to learn one way or another that he's Jehovah Jireh. And especially when you're serving him, he does not let your clothes wear out. Okay, now listen. They took his advice on this. They didn't take any person or anything, and they were out for 6 months to a year. So this is not a weekend visit. This was 6 months to a year. And Can you imagine them coming back with testimonies and saying, man, can you believe how God supplied? You remember we went to this town, nobody wanted to listen to us. And then there was this faithful, God-fearing Jew who asked us to come in. We had the best meal we had the whole 6 months there. And then how God provided for this and God provided for that. You know, I mean, they must have had testimonies of how God provided over that 6 months of ministry. Just like Jesus said, if I send you out, I'm providing for you. I will divinely arrange your hospitality. Now, you won't know where to go, but somehow somebody will contact you and you'll find a place to stay. And if people reject you, because some villages, you got to cross off the list. But don't get angry about it. Just take note by wiping the dust off your sandals and say, all right, if you don't want the gospel, I'm going somewhere else. And God will take care of that situation. Don't you seek revenge when people reject you. But he says, you're going to go from place to place. Now, how many of you have read the biography of Bhakt Singh? Bhakt Singh, famous apostle of India. How many of you read his biography? Shame for shame. How about even, what is it called? The Monsoon, what's the name of that little biography? The Monsoon, what is it? Well, there's a big biography written more recently. But the monsoon thing, all right, listen. Bhakt Singh actually took this seriously and literally and went around in not a dollar in his pocket. And the Lord ministered down there, and he started 200 churches there in India. Nothing but a couple of brothers along with them, sisters, going from town to town. It's just an amazing thing. But anyway, so here is, again, a promise to you. He says, I'm sending you to provide for you. Now, do we have to that anymore? Is that a living reality? You know, I'm so thankful when I go to Russia. You know, I say, you know, I'm going to go in there. You know, there's some orphans I want to touch and all this kind of stuff. Of course, by the time I go, my pockets are bulging. The saints in Flushing give me $15,000 to take in there. The saints in Mangat give me $29.50. Stuff my pockets. I go on in there. I never forget the first trip I took, and I gave everything away I had. I think, what was it? I think $2,300 left in one more day before I'm going home. And they take me to the Bible school where they're teaching young people how to preach the gospel. And I went there, and I'd spoken in this place many times. But I said, hey, I want to see the kids in their dorm. So I went over to this house that was converted into a dormitory. You know, it was bunk beds in every room. And I said, oh, where's the bathroom? They said, well, we don't actually have one. I mean, the outhouse over there is what we have. Well, where do they take a bath? Well, they can't take a bath or a shower. We don't have any facilities. So they have to go to some member of the church's house to take a shower, which they do once a week, whether they need to or not. I said, that's crazy. I said, there should be a wash, shower thing here, a bathhouse for these brothers and sisters who are in this place. I said, how much is it going to cost to build it? And they had a guy there, and he figured it out, and he came back. He said, well, you know, so many rubles that, yeah, give me American dollars. He says, $2,300. I said, bingo. And the next time I came back, they were so proud to take me in there. They called it Dana's bathroom. I said, no, I'm not sticking up the place. It's Flushing. Flushing, they flush. Anyway, the Russians didn't get the joke. But you see what I'm saying? Okay, so now listen. All I can say is, brothers and sisters, if God calls you and leads you out, he will provide in the most amazing ways. You got to step out to find out. But
any more jackets that God needs to provide us.
Yes. Okay. Yes. You didn't bring your tunic, did you? No. Such a man of faith. All right. Now listen. Now, it may not be that you will go to Russia or traipse about India, but God's going to show you he's Jehovah Jireh. So think bigger than you're thinking. You know, perhaps our problem here in finding our next place is we don't believe in Jehovah Jireh. But by faith, if the Lord shows us his provision, he'll provide. It's an amazing thing, really. And it seems to be the story of God's disciples throughout the thing. All right, well, that's the first simple, obviously simple thing. Now, the footnote is those verses about Herod. Now, again, it says the footnote on the aftermath of John's martyrdom, Jesus' ministry haunts the conscience of Herod. Herod is slowly going crazy, as did his father, Herod the Great. This man was a maniac by the time he died. And Herod also is going slowly crazy and paranoid about this. He actually thought that this was John the Baptist raised from the dead. And he was trying to see him, but it was dangerous, not just out of interest. So let's look at just a couple of things in the background. Now, let's read Luke 9:10. See, this is all that Luke says about it. And when the apostles returned, they gave an account to him of all that they had done. And taking them with him, he withdrew by himself to a city called Bethsaida. If you parallel verses in Matthew and Mark, you will see that they were out ministering, and then they heard that John the Baptist had been martyred, had been beheaded, and some of the disciples went and got the body and buried it, and they came back and told Jesus that was the end of the Galilean ministry. So never think that Jesus didn't have great respect for John the Baptist. This was a game changer. And but what happened is, so actually, I think it's Matthew that actually mentions this thing about the John's body and everything, and now they withdraw. Here, Luke is actually looking at what succeeded just after Herod had killed John the Baptist, and that is that as these disciples and Jesus from the countryside of Galilee, a rumor began to spread that John the Baptist is running around again. And now his conscience is so dark and guilty that he thinks maybe it's John. And he's really upset about this thing. And Luke tells that story. He's the only one who tells that side of the story, that Herod go crazy and wants to see him, not just rational purposes. And Herod's interests become dangerous, and measures are taken to bypass Galilee. So that's another very practical reason that Jesus said of Herod, whom he didn't call Herod, he called that old animal, that old fox. Tell that old fox, I've got 2 more days, and the 3rd day I go to Jerusalem. When they warned him about Herod wanting to get him just near the end of his days. That's another one in Luke that's very interesting. Okay, so here we have this story. It's just a parenthetical story, but what it's just trying to show this. The ministry of the disciples had such an effect that it actually shook the kingdom. It shook that evil king right out of his throne. He got so worried about the power. Imagine the power of a powerless man. I mean, here's John the Baptist. He can't rub 2 shekels together. And he's terrorizing the king, this guy's job is this: I'm going to spend as much money as I possibly can in 1 year. Now, I know some of you are related to that, but this was a King Herod did. He had parties like you couldn't believe. He was completely thrown off his throne by this situation. Just a little footnote to let you see what the power of kingdom ministry can do. And then we come to the 3rd section, which of course is this feeding of the 5,000. And here again, we see that Jesus has left Galilee. And as you can see over here on this side is what is Galilee, across 7 miles across, as it shows there in that thing. And up in the northern corner there in the territory of Philip is Bethsaida. And that's where they sail to get away from it all in the district of that city. But of course, what had happened, we know, is that people started running and had to run over the Jordan River there. They ran north and around. And when you go to Israel, we were right up there, Jeff. We were right up in that area right there. I think that's right up there on Bethsaida is where that olive oil place was.
Remember we did that little canal hike?
Yeah, was that Bethsaida?
It wasn't too far.
Yeah, so right in that corner there, Jesus went, and actually, yeah, that little area is a kind of a semi-jungle and stuff, actually, right near the water. That, by the way, is one of the sources of the Jordan River. You see there, that little thing there. Actually, there are 4 big sources that came down from Hermon and formed the Sea of Galilee. But that's another story. So they went over there to kind of get away. But don't you know what happens? The people come running to him, and Jesus' compassion overrules their need for solitude. How many times do you say, I just got to have my space? Are you one of those disciples? I just got to have my space. I'm sorry, not taking any calls. I'm on silence. Just buzz my leg. I'm not going to answer. I need my space. So Jesus said, we need our space. And they went over to get their space. And here come the people. They're broken, hurting. And Jesus feels compassion. And I think it's in Mark where it says, and he had compassion on them as a sheep without a shepherd. Matthew says that earlier on in the story, but Mark puts it right there in this story. And so he spent all day long healing, ministering, preaching the gospel. There's such a contrast, you see, between Jesus and his long-suffering, great compassion. There was something out of the life of God, obviously. But the disciples couldn't take it anymore. You know how disciples are. Disciples are part-time, and their batteries run out pretty quick. And so when they saw that the sunset was getting down near the hills, they said, Jesus, you better send. This was the disciples' way to minister to the people. Let them find a place to stay, for crying out loud. They've been driving us nuts. We haven't had time to rest all day. And frankly, we just send them away. We can't afford to give them something to eat. Jesus says, you give them something to eat. Now, he's actually trying to show his grace. And his grace is, well, as you'll see in a minute. Well, now, of course, this story is a lot of background in it. If you get into John 6, you'll see there's a story of Philip, who has his calculator out. He is one of these Chinese people who works in finance. And he keeps working it out. Let's say 5 loaves, 2 fish, 5,000 men. Let's see, that's 1 fish per every 2.5 thousand people. And then his brother Andrew finally comes up and says, okay, well, we got the boy. He's got these loaves and the fish, but that's the... And so there's a little story behind this. When they got back with Jesus after they'd been on their 6-month cruise over Galilee, and they came and they told him the great things they had done. We healed somebody, we preached the gospel. There was a leper, believe me. I can't if Caleb could heal lepers, but he did it. Talk about the great things they did. So Jesus says, okay, feed them. Philip, what was that calculation again? 1 loaf of bread per 1,000. Yeah. Jesus, send them away. So you see the disciples at the end of their resources. Well, I mean, they don't understand the heavenly supply. But the problem with not seeing a heavenly supply is it doesn't come direct from heaven. It comes through a supply chain. And so part of the grace of this lesson is the disciples are going to learn what it means to be a channel of a miraculous blessing. Channels of blessing. And so they took, here's the story. Jesus says, okay, have them sit down. This is the first thing. This is a mob. I want groups of 50s. So he sets them up in groups of 50s, and they got that little game of, what's that empire building game everybody plays in the middle? Yeah. They got that game. Everybody's got a little game they're playing with, and they're waiting for the food, and everything's getting organized. And then Jesus stands up with these 5 loaves. Now, these are 5 pittas. All right? This isn't some gigantic, what's those big, wonderful Chinese, Jewish sweet loaves with the mumps on top? Yeah. This isn't some huge challah bread. Some huge wheel kind of thing like this. These are 5, this is pitiful pitta that the kids had in his back pocket all day long. A couple of fishes was put in a Ziploc bag. That's all they got. And what does Jesus do? He says, Father, bless this to meet everybody's need. And then he broke it. Now, Here's what the story says, according to Luke. He just kept giving to the disciples. So, I mean, Peter came up and he said, hey, here. He broke another piece, broke it. And next thing you know, Peter's like this. Oh, it's enough. And he runs out to about, takes care of 25, 30 people. And then in his group, of course, he picked the group of the smallest number because he figured, well, at least I can supply them. And he comes back and Jesus is still doing this. He's breaking and he's letting the disciples carry the miracle. Nobody really saw the transaction except Jesus and the disciples. The others thought, oh, he must have deep pockets. I mean, the people are sensing something here, but they were all satisfied. Tell me, yeah, they smeared a little fish on that pit and they ate up and the whole thing, and they had 12 baskets left over. And Jesus says, now the point is this, brothers. When you're serving other people, you gotta let my hands feed them. I don't just feed them from nothing. I just need your loaves and fish. So like the little lad who gave Jesus all he had. And Jesus blessed it. What you have may not seem much, but when you yield it to his touch, it's amazing what the Lord can do. Now, if you are going to serve the Lord, you're going to feel at the end of yourself and that you have nothing. Going to be asked to speak or to share or to do something, you're going to feel nothing. You're going to say, Jesus, I got nothing. And he says, here, reach out your hand. And he's going to do something, you're going to share it with people and say, wow, you fed us so well. And it's a joke of Jesus, because you saw the hand that gave you the stuff, because you had nothing. And the more you serve, the more nothing. You know, sometimes when you serve, so I spoke yesterday, and by the time I spoke twice in Flushing and over here, I scared everybody away, and I'd run out of everything to say. I mean, I'm done. But the next time I have to share, hopefully I can get something from heaven to feed God's people. It's not like I got something stored up. I got another series of messages. Let's see, the incredible lightness of what? You know, so I mean, you know, so you're going to, if you serve God, you're going to be nuts too. You're going to come up empty, but you're going to see Jesus give you something. If somebody will say something, you'll read something in a book, that's it, that's what I needed. And suddenly everything comes together and you share, people say, oh, it's wonderful. How do you piece that together like that? You say, well... You know, what do you want to say? Well, I'm just a jerk. I really had nothing, but then somebody said something to me and it kind of set my mind off in this way. And that's what being a disciple is. You're going to be a blessing to many people. You know, if, it's silly, if for some reason we were so terribly persecuted tonight that you guys were all scattered throughout the country, I am fully confident that we've got at least 15 servants of God here who would preach the kingdom of God and do miracles out someplace else. It's not because of our adequacy. It's because if we've learned this lesson of the heavenly supply when his hands provide, we've learned a lesson that will stay with us the rest of our lives, no matter where we go. It's an important lesson, obviously. All four Gospels mention this thing. So it doesn't matter how small your measure is. It really doesn't. It's what you let the Lord do with it that makes you all the difference. All right, so there's the next little adventure. Now, fourth, of course, we come up to the mountaintop where Jesus asks Peter the question, but who do you say that I am? You know the story from the other passages in Matthew and Mark. But here in Luke, it's very short. And Peter says, thou art the Christ of God. Nothing about the church being built. No, blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood, but my Father in heaven. None of that. None of that. Now on this rock I'm going to build it. I'm going to give you the keys. None of that, none of that, none of that. What does Jesus say after they say, you're the Christ of God? What's the next verse? What is it? I mean, this is how simple the story is. And verse 20, and you are the Christ of God. In verse 21, He warned them and instructed them not to tell this to anyone. Now you've got a secret. I've divulged it to you. The Father in heaven's divulged it to you. Now you're going to have to keep that secret. Don't go around advertising who I am. Let people find out for themselves. You just declare me and let me prove who I am. And then he says, verse 22, is the first time they heard this, and boy, their hearts sank. The Son of Man must suffer many things, be rejected by the leaders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised up the third day. Now, I'm sure they never heard be raised up the third day. Because to finally find out that this is the Messiah, and then in the next breath to find out that he's going to be killed in Jerusalem, is no wonder Peter said, no, this isn't going to happen, right? But Luke doesn't bring all of this up. He just wants you to see, here is what he wants to see. A disciple gets to go up on the mountain and find out who Jesus is. That's the grace of God. Who do you think Jesus is now? Walk with him. Watch where he takes you. And watch the questions he asks you. Have you ever just asked you a question? If God asks you a question in your heart, there is some answer that's much bigger than you ever had conceived. It's always that way. And he does ask questions if your heart is sensitive. And when he asks you a question, you don't even understand the question, but the searching in it, he never asks a question that he's not intending to answer. Let's put it that way. And that's the disciples' privilege. I got a question for you, Jesus says. You're on the way to fuller revelation of who Jesus is. Oh, that's why I think you ought to open the Bible and ask questions of the Bible. Jesus will come back and tell you something. So they get up there on the mountain, way up there in Caesarea Philippi. Does Luke mention Caesarea Philippi? Doesn't even mention the place. But it does say, and the important thing is this, before Jesus asked the question, he was alone praying. Now, only Luke brings that out. What do you think that implies? It's not in Matthew or Mark. It says, and he was alone. He asked the question, who do men say that I am? What do you think is the significance of that? Or let me double down on this one. Because 1 week later, when he goes up further up on the mountain, and just before he's transfigured, what does it say was happening? And he was praying. Once again, this is not in Matthew or in Mark, but Luke has found out from his sources that something happened after Jesus had these special times of prayer. Right? We've already seen one of those. What was the previous thing where we noted? Well, actually two previous things already where it says specifically Jesus was praying when a very special moment came. Remember what those were?
When he chose the disciples.
When he chose the disciples, said he spent all night in prayer on the mountain by himself. And the next day he chose the disciples. You remember the other one? After he came out of the waters of baptism, he stood there praying. And that's when the Holy Spirit came down upon him. And the Father spoke from heaven. Right? But he spoke just to Jesus. You are my beloved Son. Remember? That's how Luke puts it, right? Wonderful. So now here, these two times. Now, so we what are we sensing? Nothing like this is just accidental. Jesus is not, they're not just skipping rocks off down in the Sea of Galilee and Jesus says, hey, Mel, who do people say that I am? Huh? Kind of curious. Those people out back there, they were talking a lot. What are they up to? You know, like some kind of casual thing. This is something that was pre-prayed. So I'm going to suggest that before God asks you a question, he's already prayed about you seeing the answer. If he says, come on up with me and see who I am, he's already getting ready to show you something. That's wonderful. And so this is the main point. There's little Peter looking up and saying, you know, who do you say that I am? Okay, there you are. But then now they have to keep it secret in their heart, right? All right, then the fifth part, he immediately brings in this, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily and follow me. Once again, only Luke says daily, which makes the cross a principle. If he said, you must take up your cross, you could think, okay, I'm going to die in Jerusalem, and now you're going to have to die at some point, you know. as if it was an actual death on the cross. But when he says, take up your cross daily, now we understand this is a principle of self-denial. That is, so now Jesus is saying, here's your privilege. You're identified with me. And our life together is very intimate. Now I am bearing my cross. And you're going to have to identify with that. You're going to have to bear your cross. And so that's going to mean your life, no. You got to be all in. I have made an intimate investment of grace in you from heaven. You've seen who I am. Now that necessitates a disciples being all in. Are you all in? If your life, which is suke, which in Greek means, it's the Greek word for, you know what that is? Soul. It's psychology, see, right in there? It means the study of the soul. If your soul life, I mean, if you preserve your soul, if it's self-possessed and self-preserved, it's a shame. You've seen so much of who I am. How could you be selfish and think above all else, my instincts of self-preservation must prevail? Case loss. And in the day, at the end, in the rewards, Jesus says, I'll be ashamed of you. Because we are one-on-one, we're mano. This is intimate. I'm showing you things I'm not showing other people. And now are you all in? On the other hand, if life is denied, that same suke, if you're willing to deny your soul, those things I think are so absolutely important, but Jesus, just defer them. Jesus doesn't mean, okay, I want you to quit thinking about getting married or having a good job. Just defer your soul's obsessions in order to serve me. Just lay them down. And if you do that, my grace will be sufficient now and you will gain glory later. Now, this is a shame that many people in the church don't understand there's rewards for being a disciple. There's rewards and there's risk, right? So if you are faithful, you will be rewarded in the glory with the angels. I will come. I will approve you. You'll gain everything if you'll just work on laying down your obsessions now. You will find a great life ahead of you. Don't go full stop now. Serve me now. And you will find that you'll have all that it needs to be gained later on. So, I mean, this is obviously a tremendous thing. It's a very intimate thing. It's not meant at all to be scary. It's just the truth of God's grace. If you see much, and much is required, and you need to be tight with me all the way. And then the disciples go up on that mountain, just Peter, James, and John, right? Just three of them. And they go up on the mountain and they say, wow, I think something's going to happen here. It's very important. So we always want to be asleep when Jesus is about to do something important. And so they fall asleep. Wonderful disciples. So alert, so vibrant, so faithful. Just snoring away. And meanwhile, Jesus turns inside out in glory. His face shines with the radiance. You can't even look on his face. Even his clothes. It's the glory. And of course, Luke shows you so clearly there's a glory that comes from the inside out in Luke. In the Greek, it's so clear. It comes from, it's not like a glory came down on him. It's something from inside out. Just burst out. This is who he really is. And, well, of course, I don't know what happened. I don't know if it was Moses who was a little too loud because, he's a little hard of hearing at 120 years old. You're going on an Exodus? What are you doing? It says, and he was talking to Moses and Elijah about the Exodus in Jerusalem. And the Greek word there is exodus, about his departure in Jerusalem. So in other words, Jesus was saying, I'm going the way of the cross down there. And And Elijah and Mo were saying, why don't you come on up there with us? We're having such a good time up in heaven. Jesus says, no, I want to bring this whole batch of people along with me, so I'm going down to Jerusalem. So, of course, that's what they're talking about. Meanwhile, Jesus is just shining. Why? Because this is my beloved son. I love him so much. Just let him shine. 1,000 watts is shining, and something, I don't know what it was, it woke Peter up. Huh? What's going on here? What? Of course, with Peter, and it says, let's build 3 tabernacles. And what does it say? Peter has no idea what he's doing. There's the faithful disciple, ever ready to put his foot in his mouth. Make another suggestion. Yes. No, we don't want that new church, that new house of God whose builder and maker is God, a house not made with hands. We want old hands. We want the 3 tabernacles that are built by man's hands where we can make a shrine out of this meeting. And thousands of people will come up the mountain and say, oh, Jesus and Moses and Elijah was here. Look, I think the statue is tearing. Jesus didn't say anything. Then a cloud came over. And it was one of those clouds. If you've ever been up high in the mountains and one of those clouds come in, you say, finger, where are you? And this cloud came over and the majestic glory spoke. So that Peter, James, and John would remember for the rest of your life, God spoke from heaven and said, now this is my son. Don't you ever doubt again. This is the Lord. And after he said that, the disciples ran down the hill to tell everybody about it, right? No, they were scared to death, and it says they didn't say anything about it. So they held up to another secret. I mean, anyway, what would the other 9 disciples have done? I tell you, oh, you missed it. I'm telling you, it was the greatest moment we ever had. It was up on the mountain. Nathaniel, you missed it. Oh, poor schlub. What can I tell you? Judas, well, it's just as well you missed it. What could they have said? Jesus didn't have to tell them to be quiet. They saw, but they couldn't comprehend. They heard, but it blew them away. This man we're following, I tell you, there's something about him. He's, I don't know. So we leave it there. They're on the mountaintop. They've seen glorious things. Now we're going to go down the valley where demon-possessed people. And they're going to get their tail trimmed a little bit as necessary. Every good disciple's life. But I don't want to trim your tail. So that's all we'll do for tonight. Let's just look at this as by way of summary. The Lord commits his power and vouches his provisions fully to those who serve. The Lord uses the hands of his disciples to make much out of little. The Lord praised his disciples through mountaintop visions of himself and glimpses of glory. The Lord's intimate unveiling binds us to his life and cross and destiny. Lord, you're so wonderful. We are your disciples. And in some measure, as we followed you, you've taken us up to mountains sometimes. We've seen glimpses of things that are amazing. Lord, we want to see more. We want to be more intimately connected to you in all of your interests, and also want to know of your authority and power and provision as we would serve you. Lord, we don't ask for riches. We just ask for enough that we could get on and get by and serve in your kingdom for the rest of our days. You're a wonderful Lord Jesus. Oh, there's so much more to see. Put a hunger in every heart that's here tonight, not to be jaded by these stories that have been heard many times, but somehow excited to know the reality of them. We pray in Jesus' precious name. Amen.